Yo, man, hip hop. Hip hop might be my favorite thing, right? Outside of like a person in the world. So I'm putting that out front in case I seem defensive later on in defense of hip hop because it means a lot to me. Um, but it can be complicated and complex. And we're seeing a lot of really unfortunate developments and instances of violence and issues that are directly related to hip hop. So this feels like this space, which loves hip hop with intention, and y'all who seem to mostly care about our hip hop segments, we felt like this was the appropriate place to start this conversation. So where we at with it?
Yeah, they definitely do love to come to us for these hip hop chats. But I think what's very interesting about the hip hop as a culture element, when you look at Black American culture, and I read somewhere where they were making the comparison that because Black Americans being coming into the U.S. was stripped of their history, created their own culture, and this culture is deeply ingrained with and is very closely related to hip hop, right? So to a certain extent, when you think of what elements make up a culture, which would be dress, out attire, language, sound, artistic visual representation. Hip hop culture is very much Black culture in America, right? That is the way history is held and shared through music, through art, through attire. So when we look at where the state of hip hop is right now, when we look at how many killings are happening, when we look at how many people are getting incarcerated, I think it is important for us to be able to take a step and be like, yo, this is actually this is not what hip hop is. This is not how hip hop started. This is not how it's supposed to be. This right now that's happening is a very new phenomenon when it's coming into this culture of ours that we love so much. It is not supposed to be a violent culture. It's not. It is a microphone for people who are in violent circumstances to be able to express themselves because of that, but it does not justify violence.
Yo, I'm really glad we starting kind of with some of these terms, right? Let's define some of these terms for this conversation. So hip hop is not just rap music, right? Hip hop is a culture. Hip hop includes DJing, right? Turntablism. It includes graffiti. It includes like fashion, right? So hip hop is a very multifaceted culture that was originated by Black folks in the United States, right? A big part of that culture is rap music, right? So rap music, hip hop is that's where you find that's the category that, well, less and less frequently you find Drake in. That's the category that you would find, Moneybagg Yo in. That's the category that you would find 21 Savage in, right? And 21 Savage is somebody who's very, very connected to the conversation we're having today. But one more term I want to throw out there is drill music, right? So there's hip hop, there's rap, and then there's drill music. We kind of we funneling down, and drill music is a very particular type of rap with an increased proximity to real events in the hood, right? So my man 21 Savage, who is a very successful Black rapper right now, he kind of lies on the line between rap music and drill music. Zoe, would you say that's fair to say?
I would say that's not inaccurate.
All right, for
So
sure.
more so trap music than drill music, if we're being technical
Okay.
about it.
And so would you say it's fair to say that trap music lives in the line between rap music and drill, like the sub category of drill music?
I would definitely say they both share an element that the more realistic it seems, the characters and the content that is being said, the more popular and the more attention that those artists usually get.
No doubt. All right. So 21 is definitely in the mix of this part of hip hop, of this part of rap music, right? So my man 21 let a couple tweets fly earlier this week, right? The first one, Atlanta, we have to do better. Put the effing guns down, right? I don't know about you. When I heard that, that's a very familiar. I've been hearing that. If you listen to the radio in Chicago, they have drops of literally like "Put the guns down, Chicago." So it's not a new thing for people in close proximity to hip hop to feel the responsibility to have a conversation about the violence in hip hop. Um, but he got a little backlash for that, right? As somebody who could be seen to be promoting violence, or whose violence is a prevalent topic in his music. So he hits back with one more tweet. He goes, and then he makes a statement that we'll get into later. But he goes, "A song is for entertainment. It's not an instruction manual on how to live life." So that's where we at. That's kind of what spurred this conversation, right? And is it hypocritical to be a hip hop artist with violent themes, but on the other hand, say, put the guns down, stop the violence?
The problem is that music can be enjoyable, and also hip hop has been for a long time very impressionable to young people. We've heard the term hip hop is a young man's sport, is a young man's game. Although now that is changing very much so, but hip hop is still very much in its infancy as a subculture and a culture. It's only hitting 50 years, right? It's not very old, and it's usually been a young crowd that has been supporting and has taken to hip hop. It's been the youth, and that youth so happens to be very impressionable, which is also why this the way that the styling that we get hip hop is something that we translate across many different cultures, countries, so much so that it is now the most popular genre of music in the world. So when you have these folks who come from extremely dire and very, very difficult circumstances, it kind of brings me back to the origins, listening to Ice-T and Ice Cube and Pac talking about, we're not glorifying this, we're just speaking quite vividly about, in an artistic manner, about the realities of our circumstances. That is what's happening. That is the mindset of the people that I'm surrounded by. That is the mindset that maybe I've had to take on, or that is the mindset that people can relate to around me. So it's what level of accountability do we want to put on our artists? That's the question. What
Yeah,
do we hold hip hop artists to?
perfect. So let me, and I know you kicked us a lot of game right there, but I'm gonna throw it right back to you to ask, how is there a line for you personally? Is there a line in terms of the music that somebody is making where it's either too close to true life events, or it not only speaks on violence and firearms, but does glorify them? Or is anybody who is from that lifestyle allowed to speak on it any way they would like to, and it's never going to hit your ear as inappropriate or anything like that?
Everyone should have the right to creative freedom. Otherwise it wouldn't, you can't fully indulge in moving creativity if it is not coming from a very real place. That is, the transfer that you give to art is a real emotion, right? Art is a capsule of real emotion, and how you engage with it is then going to translate that emotion and that energy. So the best art comes from real places, but real places don't have to be real scenarios, don't have to be real stories. I think that the intention should always be to promote positivity. If it is a matter of fact of saying, I'm going to describe very clearly what I see around me, that's one thing. But it is the killings that we see that are now tied into hip hop, and how people are using hip hop as a way to stoke that violent fire. You having rap disses, bro, they're not even dissing each other. They're just talking about what they're gonna do, what they have done, and what they will do. Like, it's just is that's what the mute. That's not that lacks intention. That lacks artistic integrity. That just has a terrible agenda to it, and that's the part of hip hop that I don't really mess with. And you said something interesting recently. You're like, man, I think I'm getting to a point where there's music that I don't think I can listen to anymore. You were saying I don't think that. Like, what did you mean by that? I found that interesting.
Yeah, I think you just described it, right? I think everybody has their own lines and boundaries. So I think there's two things that could ever make me not tune in to somebody, right? Is if off rip, I get that, like you just described, right? I'm hearing it and the intention isn't artistic. The intention isn't like, and everybody has a different measure of what artistic is. But if I get the sense that they are more so glorifying the violence, and whether they have a real proximity to that is important too, right? Because if it's somebody who's a culture vulture eating off this with this type of content that's not really in their life, I'm definitely turned off. But if somebody is in that life, but I feel like they're exploiting that life more than they're expressing that life, let that marinate. I didn't even know that was coming, but that's really what I mean, right? If I get the sense that they're exploiting that life more than they're expressing that life, then I'm immediately turned off, right? That's one. The second way is if developments come out in real time, right? Like real news, real murders that make me see this person as a predator in their community, right? Now, it takes me a lot to get there. And we could talk about why. We've said many times on this podcast that when a Black person gets money, a lot of people eat. But if enough comes out to make me go, all right, this person is really actually preying upon this community, even that if they come from it or whatever, that's the number two way I'm out.
Let's have an honest conversation. You're Chicagoan. You are in the South Side. You do a lot of work in the South Side. You're an activist of note in your city, right? How does it make you feel because you love hip hop so much and because you're also a part of a community that is considered to be the most violent and the hip hop that comes from that community is also equally as violent? What is your relationship as Miles Xavier, the Chicagoan, with the flag behind you, a man who literally is out on the streets helping Chicago? But nah, man, but like your point of view is so
keep
important.
building it up.
Your point of view is so important because I think you have a very unique position in Chicago where you are so front facing with the community work that you do. You're extremely active in your community. That's your life's work. But you also love hip hop and you love this drill stuff. So how do you balance that? And what's your relationship with it?
Man. Yeah, I could spend an hour answering this question, but I won't. I'll start with, I have a unique maybe, or like there's not a lot of folks with my same perspective on this in hip hop, but low key, like it's definitely not the most important perspective. There are definitely people whose lives have been more affected. There are definitely people who are closer to hip hop and making it now to the drill scene that also have a more important perspective. My perspective is underlined, right? First and foremost, that hip hop is not a root cause of violence, right? When we think about violence prevention, when we think about addressing the situations, the challenges that we have in the city, hip hop is not a root cause of violence. Economic disinvestment, structural racism, those are root causes of violence, right? Like you can even get into the structure of capitalism if you want to, but hip hop is an expression that people who've experienced violence and trauma have come up with. And now there are parts of hip hop, right, as it becomes more diverse, that are circling back and creating a really complicated relationship with that violence and trauma, right? So there's parts of hip hop for me that aren't even a part of this conversation, right? There's hip hop that is so positive, and again, I'm using hip hop to talk about rap music, but there are parts of hip hop culture, art, fashion, music that are so positive, parts of rap music that are so positive that I don't even consider them parts of this conversation. Where it really becomes a conversation to me is because when I listen to the artists that are in closer proximity to this violence, I still, as somebody who navigates this space, as somebody who moves around here, as somebody who's like, I'm around the people, I feel it. And I can't deny that I feel that music that they're making, right? And I won't, because I love hip hop and I appreciate that perspective. And I appreciate not only that I get to hear the art, but that they got to make the art and that they got to feed people and heal themselves with that art, right? So I don't think I think, like I said before, there's certain artists even within our city that I listen to and I go, you're exploiting more than you're expressing, and I just don't rock with that. But I'm not for sure not gonna say no names or call them out, because people have the ability to uplift their situation through this music. And I hear that as the most important aspect of this, right? Looking at the data, looking at the numbers, looking at how we address violence in these communities, hip hop is not even on that list of places where I would start if we're really trying to make structural change. But there are certain artists in certain situations that really make me sad that they are so tied to hip hop. And we can get into a few of those from YSL to what just recently happened to Quando Rondo.
And this comes from Miles Xavier, the data analyst of Chicago violence prevention, you know. And I'm so glad you really did touch on like the actual root causes for it. We do like to remind everybody that this is a live conversation, so shout out to Kid S in the chats. Do be sure to let us know what you think about whether hip hop is in fact a cause of violence or not. What is not cool, and what is very, very unfortunate at the moment is the fact that it's things of violence, especially in the US right now. It's not just a hip hop thing. Things of violence right now. You know, you're seeing a whole lot of robberies that are happening. Places that were once considered cool to go visit, places like LA, everyone's a mark. I just watched a documentary about how folks in the UK are using social media to target influencers, and that's because we're all there's a dopamine addiction to being able to show off our wealth, show off our accomplishments, show off our material things. So there is a larger element towards violence and safety that has to be considered, which is just, it's not just hip hop. It's things are quite violent and people are quite desperate outside, and so all of us have to almost take a very careful look at how we engage with our socials, because that's how they got pop. That's how they got Pop Smoke, and allegedly that's how what happened to Quando. But who knows?
Bro, I'm so glad you brought socials into it. That's like a huge part of this conversation, right? Because the music, in increasing its proximity to violence, is happening through social media, right? It's happening in social media in the sense that music is becoming social media, and how quickly it can be put out and how close to relevant events it is. Like, some of these songs are closer to memes than they are songs, especially when it comes to the back and forths between groups that ain't getting along, right? It's social, and man, you really nailed it, because you were saying about this time that people are desperate for validation, desperate for likes, but also desperate financially. And for a lot of folks that are on the ground in the city, social media and building a following represents a way to secure resources that you can't navigate, or don't seem like that's a way for you to get that through traditional pathways, right? So if I build up my IG following, right, now somebody might want to collaborate with me that, I don't know, is in a better situation than me, right? So they might drive me out or fly me out, right? So now I'm in a position where, or people see, or if I'm able to create this image online, people are more likely to do business with me, more likely to trust me. So in a lot of ways, all that gassing themselves up and bigging themselves up on social media is a part of a system that can uplift them out of this conversation, out of this space, right? So, and it also is the space where these back and forths are happening. And so, man, it gets so deep. There's a book called The Ballad of the Bullet. I think I've mentioned that on this podcast before, but it's all about the relationship between social media, music, and violence. Check that out, man. But it gets really deep. Social media is a huge part of this. So I won't go on and on, but thank you for bringing that into the combo, man, and acknowledging that people are just trying to eat, right? Just trying to eat.
I think we all gotta watch our relationship with these phones. We all gotta watch our relationship with these phones. There's dopamine that's connected to it. If we look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, validation is something that is an innate human requirement, right? You need to be validated to be a part of a group, and you know, writers like say Yuval Noah's, when they speak about the importance of being a part of a community, is because from the history of humans, if you weren't accepted to be part of a community, you'd die. Like literally, you need a community to be able to feed you from a child. You know, so that is ingrained in us. And when we have these very hyper, these hyper pushed ways of being able to form or be a part of a group or something like that, I think a lot of us can sometimes turn into caricatures of something that's not necessarily us, and that might be something that we're seeing. A coward will kill you, And that, I think, is what's happening into hip hop right now, man.
Bro. And man, I would just want to appreciate this back and forth. There's nobody I'd rather talk about hip hop with than you and y'all out there. So thank y'all so much, man. But the last point that I really wanted to make is that, especially when it comes to hip hop and even social media, these are some of the few spaces where young people, particularly Black young men, are encouraged when expressing like really complex and traumatic feelings, right? The only place where it's cool to say I'm sad, or it's cool to say, you know, my life is messed up, or that I ain't got nothing, or that I'm in a desperate situation, is on wax, right? And sometimes they can get that validation from social media, right? If they have the correct following and the correct setup. But we need to create other spaces, right, where folks can express that pain and express that hurt and get their art out there, express their joy in ways that aren't concerned about respectability politics. But we need to create other spaces that are healthy, other spaces that are outside of this violence, and frankly, other spaces so everybody don't want to be a rapper. Not everybody that's rapping needs to be rapping, right? They all need an outlet for sure. But let's create more spaces where these young people are encouraged and lifted up when they express, you know, their feelings, and not just the positive feelings, right? One more thing, man. These kids know what we think about them, right? So they getting this money, they looking at these situations, and they know what people want to see. 21, even in his response, was saying it's not possible for me to get money if I was rapping about religion and charity, which I disagree. But at the same time, these younger kids, right, are in a situation where they know what the world wants to see from them. They know it's going to get 1 million views. They know what y'all are going to click on. So we as consumers are also need to look at, what do we big up, what do we support, and where do we draw our lines, and how do we make that known through our consumption?
Hey, brother, listen. One thing that we love to do on this show is give people some investigative information, things that you can repeat at a dinner table and sound smart, and have folks be like, yo, where did you hear that information? That's what we do, and we dedicate our time to being able to do it. This week, that ain't no different. Thank you, Miles Xavier, for your commitment to your city, Chicago, and trying to solve the issues that come from there, and giving us such a brilliant breakdown on the actual reality of what's causing violence and hip hop's relationship with that. Because whether we want to say it or not, this show over here is very, very much hip hop, as per the views that come anytime we talk about it. So there y'all go. Y'all get that. Y'all get some of that hip hop talk.
No doubt. No doubt. And if you're going to tell people to put the guns down, cool. That's the right message. But what are we giving them? What are we telling them to pick up? I bet you if you start trading in guns for laptops, you'll have a lot of takers. You feel me? You know what I'm saying? Something to think about.
Something to think about. Oh, listen, let's get to this part of the show.